QSO Today, episode 526, Bob Pantazes, W2ARP. This episode of QSO Today is listener-sponsored. Please become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor banner on the show notes page or at the top of the QSOtoday.com webpage. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. Just a reminder that the response to my amateur radio events calendar has been great. You can get to it from the banner link on the show notes page. This calendar is updated by you, and I hope that it will become the most comprehensive amateur radio events calendar on the internet. Please use it and update it with your ham radio events. If you are new to the QSO Today podcast, please be sure to look at the QSOtoday.com website, where we have over 500 interviews with the amateur radio operators we have interviewed. From there, you can click on the links that take you to the QSO Today Academy. Our catalog contains over 500 videos on every ham radio subject, completely searchable. I hope to, over the next year or two, be able to put those 500 videos up on YouTube, where they'll be even easier to find. This is the first new episode that I've recorded since my illness in November 2024. I hope to bring you new episodes on a regular basis. I can't promise a weekly edition of the QSO Today podcast, but I hope to balance the podcast with more ham radio operation of my own and time on my workbench. Bob Pantazes, W2ARP, has had long interest in amateur radio since high school in the 60s, and later licensed a decade or two later. Bob is active chasing DX and building up his contacts for DXCC. W2ARP enjoys the social side of ham radio from his active interest in regular nets, ham radio club, and socializing at POTA events. W2ARP is my QSO Today. W2ARP, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Bob?
Yes, I am, Eric. Good day.
Bob, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, it started in high school back in the 60s. I went to Atlantic City High School in Atlantic City, New Jersey. It was an older building, and it was 4 stories and had a clock tower. And the ham radio shack was up in the clock tower. We had no teacher monitoring us. We just, at the end of the school day, we go up to the 4th floor classroom. There's a staircase behind it, took us up to the top of the clock tower, in the clock tower. And then we had free reign of the roof. We had wire antennas on the roof. And I said there was no supervision, and nobody fell off the roof. Nobody got hurt. And I got to thank the one person who was in charge of the group, or did a lot of the work. His name is Ben, KB2GUK. He's now November Echo 2 Romeo. After 60 years, he finally changed the call letters. He was using the novice call would have been KN2, but when he got generally got KB2. And he kept that for 60 years. And just this last year, he just changed to a shorter call. And I talked to him quite often.
Was he your mentor?
Yes, definitely. He brought his equipment in from his home, and that's what we used. It was, I remember it was.
Was he a student?
Yes, he was. He was a year ahead of me. I was a freshman. He was a sophomore.
So that's pretty amazing that the school gave you the key to the clock tower, or did everybody know that the clock tower was just open?
Nope. They gave us the key to the clock tower. Unbelievable in those days. Compared to now, nobody's allowed on the roof. It's insurance problems. I mean, we did a contact with the ISS, International Space Station, for a school, and we had to put up our antennas on the roof. It was a nightmare getting permission, and then they needed supervisors up there, the janitors and everybody else to watch us and make sure we don't put holes in the roof and don't fall off the roof. So It changed in all these years. It really has.
Even in the 70s, I can tell you that at one of the high schools I went to, I was the only amateur radio operator at the time.
Right.
And they bought us a rig and gave us a room, and they let us run coax through electrical conduits that were already in place. It was a different time. They didn't worry about a thing.
I know. Unbelievable. But nowadays, well, we got to go by the rules. The insurance companies, I think, rule now.
Did you get your first license then in high school?
No, I did not. I did not get the first license. What happened many years when I was 9, my father passed away, and we had very little money. So I figured I could not afford the equipment at that point. So I did not get my license, but I still participated as much as I could without a license, still hanging around there, helping with the antennas and setting up radios. I learned a lot how to hook up a radio and how to make it work. And in those days, you tuned it, for a tube tuning. You dip the grid and, and all that. And I learned a lot from Ben and the whole group up there. There's another gentleman named Terry Anderson. I don't remember his call, but we lost track of Terry. Sadly, there's only one other person, Alan, W2WJ. He's the only one else left in this group. A good friend of mine, Sheldon, W2ABS. He's a silent key now. He died about 10 years ago. But all of us were in the club. Alan was the only one that got a license in that group.
Did you have an interest in electronics and radio even before this?
Yes, very much so. At home, I always listened to shortwave, had a shortwave radio. I remember building an Allied kit shortwave radio. It drifted like mad, but it still worked. I built my own stereo system.
Like a Heath kit or Allied kits?
Allied kits. Yeah, they made kits.
Yeah, for the younger people, those companies had amazing catalogs, if you recall.
They sure did. Oh, you just sit there all day reading,
Yeah, it was like Sears called their catalog the Wish Book at Christmas time.
That's right.
But for those of us in electronics, the Newark catalog, the Allied catalog, all of these catalogs were great. Heathkit catalog, they were great reads.
Oh, yes.
If you were interested in equipment.
I remember calling Heathkit. My friend Alan was trying to do something. It was snowing in Benton Harbor, Michigan, so they closed the factory that day. I remember that one.
This interest in ham radio and electronics, did that kind of create a pathway for you in terms of the education you got outside of high school once you left high school?
Yes. Matter of fact, in high school, the reason I didn't stay in the club any longer was I went to what they call the Vo-Tech school, which was electronics courses. It was in another building in the middle of town. So, of course, I couldn't get back to the radio club because you had to take a bus either way, a public transportation bus, not a school bus. And then from there, I went to a school after high school. It was called Electronics Training Center. It was basically a 2-year school for electronics. The only thing I regret, I should have probably gone to a full college, and gotten a degree in broadcast management or broadcast electronics, because I really loved the broadcasting end of the business.
Did you get like a first class or second class mobile telephone license?
Yes, I did. When I became 17, I got a car. I saved up for a car, and I drove up to Philadelphia, which is about 60 miles from Atlantic City. And at the old customs house, the FCC had an office in there, and you go up there, you take the test, and I passed the commercial test at that time. And I remember the guy who was giving the test, his name was Joe Walsh. He wouldn't say anything. He would just shake his head. Yes, you passed, or no, you failed. He didn't say anything, except one time. There's an older gentleman. He's taking his ham test. He brings up the sheet, and Mr. Walsh looks at it and says, "You can't do this." "Oh, I see what you did. You didn't follow directions. You're supposed to fill in the correct answer, not the incorrect answer." But I could check it anyway. No problem. He puts the template down on it. He goes through it, and he screams out, "Ha! You failed anyway."
You went to this electronic training center, and you got your 2-year certificate?
Yes.
And then you had the commercial broadcast license?
Yes.
So what did you do after that?
Well, I worked for a company called Reitzel Communications. That was my first, it was my second job. My first job was working for Lafayette Electronics in a store. I was a store clerk. And I worked after school the Electronics Training Center. I would come home and go to work at this Lafayette electronics store. Did that for a couple of years. And then we had one customer come in, Dave Reitzel, and he's still around. I talked to him, and he's starting a business fixing two-way radios and marine radios. This is down the shore near Atlantic City, and he gave me my first job there. So that's how I started. Then I went from, he was having some financial problems, so I ended up going to another company called Larry Smith Electronics, and they did the same thing. The only thing is the IRS got into his case there, and he had to shut down, but we'll not go into that. And then finally, I also worked for Motorola Communications and Electronics. I was a little bit disappointed at Motorola because we did not have the best test equipment or the training. I'm very disappointed how they handled their own shops.
Really?
Yes.
So surprising.
It was very surprising. But after they, slowed down their own shops, other people owned shops, and I had friends that worked at the privately owned shops, and they had a lot more training and a lot better test equipment. That was a very interesting learning experience in my life there.
So you worked for an MSS, that's what they call a Motorola service station, right?
Yes, that's exactly it.
And you were in two-way radio repair and test?
Yes, two-way radio. Although when I was working at Lafayette, I also did some part-time work at the local radio station in Atlantic City. It's called WRNJ. It was on 95.1. It was 3,000 watts ERP, a 1,000-watt transmitter. It was on top of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in downtown Atlantic City. We called it the yachting station, the nation's yachting station. I remember, the announcers would say that. And played beautiful music, no vocals. If you played a vocal, the owner would be calling you up, says, "Get it off, fade it down, fade it down."
So you're saying it was like elevator music?
Yes. This is back in the early 70s. So, and it was mono. He didn't even go stereo yet. I remember, one night the chief engineer was out of town, and I get a call that they signed off at midnight. When they signed off, the console went black. So I get up there, the power transformer opened up. So we went around, looked around in the junk room. We found a power supply, a high voltage power supply. We put it in. I got them back on the air at 6 o'clock in the morning when they signed on again. So
you got a feather in your cap for that.
Yes.
It seems to me, in looking at your background, that you were also involved somehow in the radio paging business. And
yes,
in the 80s, I was involved in it as well. How did that come about?
I got a job at the city of Atlantic City. It was a horrible job. I'm Jewish, and the boss was very anti-Semitic, and he caused a lot of problems. So I finally got a job. First, I got a job at a system company called Bally Systems, and they did the slot machines in Atlantic City. They monitored the slot machines. I got a great education in computers there. And then from there, I went to Syntonic. I was shop manager, Syntonic Electronics. And then we opened up a small business that we did two-way radio wholesale. We didn't deal directly with the fire departments, the police department. We dealt with smaller mom and pop shops who needed repairs, and we took care of that. And then we also had a trunking system, but Nextel came in and was really killing us. So I sold off the business. Then I got a job at the paging company, Metropole Paging. That was a fun job.
You had a stint as an entrepreneur?
Yes.
Doing trunk radio?
Yes, trunk radio, and then repairing two-way radios for police and fire.
Was that a Motorola trunk system, or was that Johnson?
I can't remember the brand, but it was a very basic system. It used different PL or CTCSS tones for each repeater. And when it would scan and you would listen, and the radio would listen for the tones, you had to put a module into the radio, and it worked that way. We called it the poor man's trunking system.
We called them, they were community repeaters.
Yes.
When you first got into it, were they using computerized tone panels at that point, or were they using panels that actually had reeds plugged into them?
Well, they're using computerized panels. I remember the reeds, yes, but yeah, there was a computerized panel that it would put the tone on for each customer, and when the radio would be scanning all the frequencies, and when it heard the tone, it knew it was on the right customer, and it would come on.
I too had a community repeater or two in those days, and just as they were coming out with, I think Communications ComSpec had a panel. I think there were a few.
Yeah,
that was the poor man's trunk system. But I also remember when trunking started, I think at the time there were only two companies. I think Motorola, E.F. Johnson had theirs,
Right.
And it wasn't very long before we were starting to compete with cellular.
I know.
So you did that for a while, and you ended up going to Metrocall.
Yes. We sold the business, and then I went over to Metrocall. That was a fun job. I worked my way up to supervisor of the field engineers. It was a great job. The boss, Paul, was nice. The person over him, his name is Keith. We just lost him. He was a ham, and he just became a silent key last year. I still keep in touch with a couple of people that work there. And, it was nice going out to these sites. Some of them we call slumlords. You have to get the mice out of the place first to get to work on the transmitter. And we had the best record in the company of keeping the equipment on the air. We had the least amount of outages because we did every 3 months. We see each transmitter once every 3 months to do preventive maintenance. They did one time take a couple of people down to Washington where the headquarters were, and they went to a transmitter site and they opened it up and it hadn't been looked at in years. The dust was inches thick in it, right? And as soon as they opened it up, the dust got sucked into the fan and the fan shut down and the transmitter shut down. It was a real embarrassment for the home office. But our stuff was, we vacuumed it out and, changed filters if they required air filters and whatever we had to do to keep them on the air.
As I recall, all of those businesses were family owned at the beginning, right?
Right.
They were all either mobile telephone businesses that started using their mobile telephone channels for paging channels because people were buying cellular or trunked radios instead of the IMTS. IMTS is a kind of mobile telephone system that they had those days. So rather than wait for an operator to tell you that the line was clear so they could make your call, so then you had cellular. And when cellular came in, all of those companies then converted to paging.
Right.
As you saw, probably, you start off with local or regional paging, and then the idea was then to start merging your channels with other carriers in order to give yourself regional paging and things like that. That's kind of how I saw the industry going.
That's how it did. Metrocall bought up a lot of small companies, and we had to go out and rearrange their equipment and update it and do a lot of work that way. So I said it was an interesting job. One time we bought one company, and I was down in Wildwood, New Jersey, which was the end of where the system ended. And my boss said, we bought this company, and they have one transmitter there in Wildwood. I looked around. I found it. I said, the transmitter is fine, but it's not receiving. It had terrestrial receiver. Okay. He says, well, when the tower crew gets down there, the tower crew is doing something, head up. I'll find out where the next transmitter is located. So he found out. So I headed up to that site, and I went to that site. And sure enough, the transmitter was okay. It wasn't receiving a signal. So I went to the third site. And that's where the problem was. It was like 8 o'clock at night. It was a bad board. I ended up pulling the board out, sitting around. I fixed it, got it back in there, and made a temporary patch to keep it working. And pretty happy about my workmanship there.
I had a great time during that period of time.
So did I.
I had customers in New Jersey that were sending us pagers into Denver for repair as well. That was a great time. So what happened after that? We're not yet to ham radio, right?
No. At that point, I had my ham radio. I did get my ham radio license at that point before I went to the paging company. Yes, when I had my business, I got my tech, and then I got my general and extra because I was also working on some ham radio equipment, not a lot, but we also. So I managed to get my license, and that time you had to get the code, so I had to learn the code again.
What year did you get your first license?
That was about 40 years old, so about 35 years ago, roughly.
So that would be 1990?
Yes, roughly that area, yes.
And what was your first call sign?
November 2, Whiskey Romeo Delta.
What was your favorite operating mode when you first started?
Well, it was phone. I said, well, as a tech, I had the 2-meter rig in the car. And then when I got my extra, I ended up buying an ICOM 706 Mark IV, Mark II, I think it is, rig. Had UHF, VHF, and HF in it. Put that in the car with a Tar Heel antenna, and it was fun to drive around and be on HF. Only thing is, one day I had my wife in the car, and I was you have to tune the radio a little bit and tune the antenna, and I started drifting off the lane, And my wife says, "You get that thing out of here now." So I just have a VHF and UHF now in the car, thanks to my wife, who's also a ham. Her call is KC2AHL.
She didn't make you get rid of the radio in the car.
Yeah, she did. She DHF because it was too much involved driving and tuning, and I would.
She didn't ban ham radio from the car altogether.
No, she really encourages it.
Does she have a 2-meter radio in her car?
No, she didn't want it when we moved here to North Carolina. She didn't know enough people yet, so.
To make it worthwhile?
Yes.
And she could call you on your cell phone now if she wants to talk to you rather than...
And the reason she got the license and everything, she got very lost. And the cell phone had no signal. It was one of those big old car cell phones, and I had no signal. And she said, "I wish I had a ham radio." She finally found somebody that asked directions how to get back to where she was going. So she said when she came home, she says, "I'm going to take the test and get my ham radio," and she did.
Oh, good for her. That wasn't a surprise?
No, it wasn't. It really wasn't. I've been, doing it then for about 5 or 6 years, and she saw how much fun I enjoyed it, how much, time I put into it. And, at least I wasn't sitting at a bar drinking,
It's funny how many people will say, hams will say, at least, well, she knows where I am.
That's right.
If I'm in the Ham Radio Shack, she knows I'm not in a bar drinking somewhere. And now this mid-show break. The QSO Today project now has over 500 podcast episodes and hundreds of hours of virtual ham radio expo presentations, all freely available and fully supported by you, the listener. This short message and the later mention of the Ham Radio Workbench podcast are the only breaks in the program. QSO Today has no commercial sponsors, so no one influences the content or direction. This project exists solely to promote amateur radio and the people who make it thrive. Producing QSO Today is like a half-time job. Your support at any level covers the tools, hosting, and production costs that keep it going. And while it is a labor of love, it isn't free. Only about 6% of listeners contribute. Please consider making a donation. Use the slider on our donations page to set up the amount that reflects the value that you get from each episode or from our library of educational videos. Make it monthly to help secure the next 500 episodes. You can also become a listener sponsor, shop on Amazon using our referral link, share QSO Today with friends, subscribe to our mailing list and YouTube channel, and help spread the word. Every action is value for value. Keep QSO Today alive by taking action now. We return to our QSO. What is your favorite operating mode now?
It's FT8, believe it or not.
Really?
The reason is I'm a DX chaser, and it just seems to be easier to get in with FT8 than even CW. When you don't even hear CW, FT8 is still working. So I just found that to be a very enjoyable mode. Plus, the nice thing about FT8 is there's a program called JT Alert that you hook up with it, and you can tell it. Remember when, ZW8S was on the air from South of Africa and a little island? And what I would do with FT8, I knew he was on. He was only on FT8. It's a one-man operation. And I just put his call into JT Alert, and it would alert me when I could start hearing him. I hear other people calling him, but I couldn't hear him. And as bands changed the day, as the day progressed, all of a sudden the alert goes off, and I think I can get him now. So that's how I got him. That's why I enjoyed.
What rig do you use to operate FT8?
A K4, Elecraft K4.
I just built a QRP Labs QDX as part of my recovery, and I'm surprised how well I'm looking at FT8 right now. It's running on another computer over here. And I can tell you, even without the antenna tuner being tuned, I go up and change bands, and I'm hearing all kinds of activity on FT8. And it's quite amazing.
It is. And the other thing nice about it, if you want to see if 6 meters is open, just click on the FT8 and put in the 6 meter frequency and just monitor for about 15 minutes, and you'll see if it's open or not. Or then move down to 10 meters, whatever you want, you see if the high end is open.
It's very interesting. I've only been doing this for a couple of days now, and I'm just quite surprised at how many signals it's recovering, knowing that the antenna is not tuned. So it's quite amazing.
It is amazing.
So you're using an Elecraft K4 to do FT8.
Yes.
When you say you're chasing DX, you're doing this as a way to build points for awards?
Yes, for DXCC from ARRL, I have officially 296 entities, and unofficially I have 299, meaning I have 2 cards and one's on its way. So those 3 extra contacts will put you at 299. So I'm looking for 300 right now. I'm very anxiously.
I guess it's your logbook that confirms it, right?
Yes.
I mean, you don't need to have it from both sides anymore.
No, Logbook of the World. Yes, Logbook of the World will confirm it. But you do need, if the station does not use Logbook of the World, you need a QSL card still.
Is there a way to, in the FT8 exchange, to let the person at the other end know that you're chasing DX for points and that you'd like a card?
No, there isn't. FT8 is just signal report and your location and 73.
That's it.
Yes.
So you're touching the stone, but you're not rubbing it.
That's exactly right. So you have to go into QRZ and see what they want for a QSL card and follow directions. And, a lot of them do a club log. So you put a little donation in club log, and you get a verification. Some of them will then add it to Logbook of the World. So that makes it real easy in life.
And I also see that, at least from your QRZ page, that you're a QSL manager, right?
Yes.
What does that mean for those of us who may not understand the lingo of the low bands?
Okay, what happens is there's certain people who live in countries. South Africa happens to be, I have 2 from South Africa. They tell me the post office service is very poor there. So they do not get QSL cards. So what they do is they send me their logs, and on QRZ, it says, if you want a QSL card, please contact W2ARP, and he'll take care of it for you. And the obligations that I do is I keep their logs, and I have to buy their cards. So I put a little disclaimer in my note that if you want a QSL card, please make a donation of at least $2 to cover overseas stamps and the cost of the cards. And anybody locally or stateside, if they just send me an SASE, I'm satisfied with that. I don't go after the $2. I'm just asking as a donation to, keep the kitty floating.
Okay, and how much work is that?
I do one in the Caribbean, V44KAI, Joel, and I get about 5 or 6 cards a week. Now, the 2 South Africans, I get maybe 2 or 3 cards every month. They're not as active. They're not, for some reason, they don't get as much activity. Although one, Raul, ZS1 Charlie, he is very active on the air. But I don't get many cards. I guess there's too many operators from South Africa that people don't need them.
Very interesting.
It is. It's a nice way to give back to the hobby a little bit. There's a group called the QSL Managers Association. I belong to that group, and they help you a lot. As a matter of fact, if somebody needs a QSL manager, if they go there, they can find one for you. That's how I got a couple of these people from the QSL Managers Association.
Now, you also belong to a large number of radio clubs, right?
Yes.
Like everywhere you've been, you're still a member of where you've been and also where you are now?
Yes, definitely. Well, we started life in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and the first club I belonged to was called SCARA, Southern Counties Amateur Radio Association. And also from there, I joined South Jersey DX Association. South Jersey DX Association is where I learned a lot. The president is a good friend of mine now, Bob, N200. He's the president of the club. And what we do is we do 4 160 contests a year, 3 CW, 1 phone. And we can do it because we have 10 acres of land. Well, not quite land. Half of it's 5 acres on land. The other 5 acres is in a salt marsh. And in the salt marsh is a 300-foot tower, which used to belong to the ship-to-shore radio station out there in West Creek, New Jersey. And the site got sold off to a company who tried to do internet over shortwave for ships at sea. Well, it didn't work out well. So the site went up for sale, and somebody found it and said to another friend of ours, Bob, who owns an FM radio station, a Christian radio station, "Are you looking for a site?" He says, "Yes." He says, well, the site on West Creek is for sale. So he got a fundraiser, bought the tower and the building, nice building. And he said to us, well, thank you for finding the site for me. He says, I'm going to dedicate a room to you guys for ham radio operation. So we have a room. We have 5 beverages out in the woods. And then we have 2 inverted Vs that are like this on the tower. And what happens is we can phase them in and out, and we can work the world with that station. We usually come in number 1 or 2 in the United States.
Now, is that a remote station now? Or?
No, it's strictly a manned station. During this time of the year, it goes dormant. And there is a station in there. There's a K3 in there that the club owns. And a couple of people come in there and do run contests who live in an HOA or anything like that. So it gets used. We talked about doing it remote, but all he has is a very slow internet going there. And plus the FM station needs to be on the internet, so we don't want to take up too much bandwidth from him.
I've seen that there's a lot of clubs now that are building remote stations for their members just because perhaps their members are not quite as mobile as they used to be. Or
Yes.
So it seems to me that there's an opening for that kind of opportunity across the country if you want to belong to one of those clubs.
There is another club I belong to and got me involved in it is called the Gloucester County Amateur Radio Club, which is located in southern New Jersey. And they have a remote station, which I use quite often when there's a net on the one club up there that's on 80 meters. I can't make it from Greensboro, North Carolina, 80 meters up there during the daytime. So I use their station to get on their little net when I'm here.
You want to become a DX contester or even a DX chaser. How important is belonging to a DX association to becoming a successful DX chaser or contester?
Extremely important. As I was saying, Bob N2OO is a good Elmer of mine, and he really got me over the hump of QSL cards and how to process them and how to get them and how to make more contacts, how to listen. And, the operation, a lot of them most of them are split where they transmit on one frequency and they're receiving they just tune around on the receive frequency looking for people that's calling, if you know what I mean.
So you're never too old to have an Elmer. No.
Bob and I usually go to Hamvention in Dayton together. I drive from here and he drives from New Jersey. We have a great time.
Did you go this year?
Yes. It was a nice convention. Matter of fact, he got me sitting at the Indexa booth. Now, Indexa, it's a group of people from the states who fund the expeditions. They have members who pay $20 a year, and they take the money, they invest it, and from the investments they fund some, give money to the expeditions, and also for groups that go out and do basically maybe bring school supplies to a country that they're doing a de-expedition in, for the kids and stuff like that, stuff they leave, or they leave a radio behind for somebody. They do a lot of charity work like that.
Are you mentoring anybody right now? Although you just moved to North Carolina.
Yes. Yeah, we moved from Jersey down to Florida. We spent 10 years in Florida, got tired of the hurricanes, and moved here to Greensboro, North Carolina. So I've only been here a year and 3 months. So, I'm involved in there's 3 clubs here I'm involved in. Each one does something different. So I do get involved with some of the newer guys, give me a call if you need something, and, or they come to a meeting. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? Matter of fact, this is funny. Last night, I got a call from my friend Ben, from high school. And he says, what kind of amp would you buy? And, we started talking about amps. So I was mentoring. He says, well, thank you for mentoring me. I thought, wow. I really felt proud of that one.
I think there's a lot of wisdom and skills that we acquire over the years as amateurs that end up being quite valuable to newbies.
It is. One advice I give to newbies is don't start off with a portable like I did. Start off with maybe a 2 meter rig with 50 watts and an outside antenna and a power supply. I said the portables just don't give you the range. You get very frustrated very quickly.
Yeah, I would agree. I just stupidly sold an IC7300 to a friend of mine thinking that would raise some cash for something else I wanted. And now I'm sorry that I did it because it was such a great radio for the limited amount of HF that I do, that I'm about to buy another one, even at a much higher price than what I sold it for, because it was worth having. It's like there's something about HF that's more magical than 2 meters.
That's true.
I mean, 2 meters is great for the intercom with your friends, but the HF side is what I think makes it for me. I'm the kind of operator that I very seldom get on the air, but I like to build stuff and I like to confirm that it works.
Right.
That's kind of what it's all about for me, but I'm sorry that a lot of people, their first exposure is a Chinese radio on 2 meters. That's often hard to program and then hard to find somebody to come back to you.
That's right.
What do you find is the most interesting thing that you do now on ham radio? Of all the things that you're doing a whole heck of a lot of stuff, but what really floats your boat at this point?
I just put up a delta loop for 40 and 80 meters. And I just, I have a easy hang slingshot. I got as high as I could in the tree, and it works really decently. I'm pretty proud of that. I like playing around with the different antennas. And also I build a Balum for an end-fed antenna, 49-to-1 Balum for an end-fed antenna that I use at field day or parks on the air. And that works out very nicely. So I like building projects with antennas right now.
Are you doing POTA?
Yes, we have one club that does that, and we go out together and do it. And it's a lot of fun, except since you said about the Chinese radio, one gentleman has a Chinese radio, and the only problem was its receiver, I thought, was kind of wide, because he would be in 20 meters, and I tried 15 meters. I was still getting noise out of his receiver. I could hear it. It was just, yeah, I really believe in buying the better stuff, spending the extra, even if you have to spend twice the money, it's just worth it. I have a Yaesu FT891 for POTA, and it's just a solid radio. And matter of fact, somebody else had one, and we could almost be on the same band, as long as somebody's in CW band and somebody's on phone bands, and not interfere with each other at a POTA site.
POTA is Parks on the Air. It's still running, right? There's chasers and kind of like soda.
Oh, yes. It started, but the ARRL started 1 year of it. And then a group of them just took over. There's a website for it, and you can post on the website spots. And I'll chase POTA stations here. Most of them are on FT8, believe it or not, but I'll chase them with FT8. And, if you get 10, most guys have to get, well, the rule is you have to make 10 contacts at a park before you get entered into the log as official. You can enter less, but it won't be official until you can do 10. It's kind of fun. It really is.
Does it become a barbecue as well? I mean, it's a social event if you're doing it with a club.
It does. Either we get order food out, or somebody brings in a small barbecue. It's like field day, a short version of field day.
As two old men speaking to each other, do you think that that ham radio and the social opportunities that it offers is good for longevity?
Yes, it is. They say people who don't have friends or live alone don't live as long as people who socialize. So, if you don't have a significant other, ham radio is fantastic. Even if you do have a significant other, we still, it gives us time that she does her thing and I do my thing, and then we, get together at night and talk about it.
Does your wife go to POTA?
She'll go to field day. She'll actually come over field day. She'll drive by herself over, and I spend a couple hours there.
But she doesn't do ham radio clubs and...
No, because between you and me, she gets bored at some of the speeches or the presentations they have. It applies a lot to ham radio, and you really have to be into the hobby more. Yeah, she is.
One of the things that you mentioned on your QRZ site, you're a 32nd degree Mason. My grandfather was also a 32nd degree Mason in the Blue Lodge, and unfortunately, I don't think it passed on to the children and grandchildren. Could you explain a little bit about what that is and how many years it might take to get to that level?
Okay. Well, basically, Masonry is a fraternity. You have to be a man over 18 and believe in a supreme being. We don't care what religion you are, just believe in a supreme being. And basically, there's 3 levels of Masonry, like ham radio, and it takes about 3 to 6 months to get to the Master Mason degree. And then after that, you can go for 32nd degree, which is a lot of little classes, and that could take a couple of years. But they're done a lot of times at night and, in different places. That's easy to do. So, and the biggest thing we try to do is charity. I belong to a fraternity down in Fort Myers, and last year, there's an area near us that's a poorer area, and the people can't afford a lot. We went out and bought a bunch of toys at a store, and we drove in there and we worked with one of the social workers there, and they distributed toys to the kids who really needed the toys. So it's a great, an organization that way. And I got a good story about it. I have a jacket that says, Mason, and somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, you're a Mason." I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, thank you." I said, "Please explain." He said, "Well, when I was younger, my father died right after Thanksgiving, and my mother didn't have the money for Christmas. But my father's brother was a Mason, heard about this, and the Masons gave us the greatest Christmas ever."
That's what I remember as a grandson, going to a lot of pancake breakfasts. There were always like children's hospitals and other kinds of organizations that were the beneficiaries of money that was raised by the Shriners. They have a burn hospital.
Well, they have a bunch of hospitals, children's hospitals. They have one in Philadelphia, an excellent children's hospital in Philadelphia. Matter of fact, a couple of us would drive up people who couldn't drive, that distance for a child to get some therapy or whatever the child needed,
And now this mid-show break. Every 2 weeks, I listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Vince, VE6LK, Mark, N6MTS, Thomas, K4SWL, Michael, VA3MW, and Rod, VA3ON, and their guest on often topical and important projects in amateur radio. This discussion amongst the regulars and their guests remind me of the conversations that I used to listen to on 146.94 and 146.46 megahertz in Orange County, California, while working on my own workbench almost 50 years ago. It is amazing how much practical ham radio knowledge that we can absorb by listening to the Workbench podcast that starts to make sense when we start our own deep dive into our own projects. So join me by listening to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast now and as George and crew push beyond 200 episodes. You can get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast by clicking on the banner in this week's show notes page. And now, back to our QSO. Now, do you find ham radio operators in masonry?
Yes. Matter of fact, the lodge I joined in when we moved to Florida, there's a couple of lodges. I was looking around and I went to a club meeting, and one of the men, his first name is Lang, he's silent key. He says, "Oh, you're a Mason too?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Why don't you come over to our lodge? We got a ham station in the back room."
There's some crossover there as well.
Yes. Matter of fact, there's some contests where it's Masons, talk, Masonic stations come on the air, and you try and make as many contacts as you can. With, you don't have to be a Mason to make a contact, but, it's Masonic lodges that have stations that go on the air.
Do you have a ham radio workbench?
Yes, it's over my left-hand side there.
And what are you building on your ham radio workbench?
Well, I repair and build. I built the last antenna on there, and I'll put little projects together for the house. If we buy something that has to be assembled, I'll assemble it there. But I remember we moved in here. I have an FT991A for 2 meters and 40 and 70 centimeters, but it's a backup for HF. And all of a sudden I noticed 2 meters wasn't transmitting. I mean, it had full current, but there's no power coming out. So I put it on the bench, and with the movers, they must have dropped it because a coil in the 2 meter circuit broke loose, and I had to resolder it and got back on the air. So I do use the bench a lot.
And do you have a favorite piece of test equipment?
Yes, I got a Ramsey service monitor.
Really?
Yes.
So I had a Ramsey service monitor at one time in the pager repair business. In fact, there weren't very many people that actually knew much about the Ramsey service monitor. Have you had it a long time?
Yes. When we had the business, I bought it. I just kept that from the business. I did have a Spectrum Analyzer service monitor that I sold with the business, but I kept the Ramsey. I used to keep the Ramsey in the car just for, because of its lightness, and very light, and you go walk up to a site and do all the testing you need, and you don't have to carry a 45-pound piece of test equipment around with you.
We used it in one of the work positions for pager repair, but you're right. It was a very cool little rig. It was still a couple $1,000.
Yes. It's about that. It's about $1,500, I think, now if it's still in business.
Are they still in business, Ramsey?
I was going to look them up. I just never got a chance this morning. I was going to look them up and see if they are in business.
Well, now you're going to have me looking them up too.
Yeah, I know. Let me know. They got in trouble, though. They were building FM broadcast transmitters that weren't type accepted. The FCC caught up with them.
Well, there's a lot of those companies that are still in business. Like IFR, I think they sold out to the other companies.
They did.
So you have the ability then to work on the radios. And do you build any kits?
I haven't built a kit in years now. I just, I think I built a little. I said the last thing I built was a Balum. That's the last thing I built from scratch. Winding the coil and everything.
Now, you mentioned that you have an interest in model railroading. Do you still have that interest?
Yes, I do. I started when I was 8, before my father passed away. He got me my first set of trains, which was a Lionel. It was a steam engine. And matter of fact, I still have it to this day. It's still running. It needs very little work. Only thing I did is it puffed smoke. I had to clean out the unit that puffs the smoke. It got a lot of, stuff in there. So I cleaned that out, and it's been working great ever since.
Now, it's my understanding that model railroads, model trains come in different gauges.
Yes, a lot of gauges, yes.
What gauge is your layout?
It's the O gauge. It's Lionel O gauge. I only collect Lionel. I know people that have O gauge, but they collect other brands, but I just stick with Lionel. Now, their sizing is not perfect. Like the gate that, comes down across the road, it's much bigger than it should be, and the little man that comes out from the switcher, when he comes out to switch the tracks, he's too small. It's just their sizing is not great there, but I still love the Lionel, and they're here in North Carolina.
What kind of layout do you have? Do you have a layout that takes up most of the garage? And
no, we don't. What we have is an office, a third bedroom, which is an office. So it's a 4x8 layout. As a matter of fact, I have it on pads that you can pull it out so you get to the windows. It's right up against the windows. So, but I have 3 inches on that layout.
And is there a crossover between ham radio and model railroading? I mean, are you using any controls or any expertise that you've gotten in amateur radio to apply to model railroading?
No, other than just basic electronics, no. There is, you can get wireless controls now, but I just never got into that.
So you just power up the track?
Yes. I power up a track and, that runs the train.
And do you do the paper mache mountains and all that stuff?
I did it when we were in Florida. I had a bigger layout in Florida. Yes, I did then. Here I don't have because it's against the windows. I don't want to cover the windows with anything. So, yeah. But I did a nice mountain scene in Florida. I think that's on the QRZ's page, if I'm not mistaken. I never put the new one on there.
Now, is there something we could do, Bob, that would better interest maybe the younger generations in amateur radio? Is there something that you see that we could be doing that we're not doing right now?
You know what? Contesting. I mean, a lot of younger people play games, video games. I think contesting is a way to get people, get younger generation interest in ham radio. It's get your adrenaline running, and you're going after the next contact. You're writing, you're memorizing a call. Sometimes you put it down.
Would you suggest that there's a contest that you would recommend to bring a would-be or potential ham to as a way, besides field day, perhaps?
Yes. Well, field day is an excellent one, but a better way is like the youth on the air, or when the school contesting are on. That's fantastic. Yes. I mean, it's schools,
Clubs that you belong to, are they involved in any recruiting of younger people, or at least advertising that there's an opportunity, or finding a grandson or a nephew or someone like that to bring?
Yeah, the High Point Club, they go to the local museum here in Greensboro, and they do a demonstration of CW, and it attracts a lot of kids. There's a lot of children are standing around there want to learn CW, or want send their name out, in CW. It works out great. They'll spend a couple hours there with these children, and they love it. And they give the parents information, like contact the ARRL for more information and stuff. Yeah,
It's kind of a loaded question whether we should be worried or not about whether there's a future in ham radio, although I think that maybe there seems to be just a natural evolution of people wanting to come back to doing more things with their hands because maybe they're burnt out by the computer world. They just want to escape from it. So maybe this will occur naturally. But do you think that perhaps maybe we're overly worried about the future of ham radio?
Well, I think the problem that ham radio has, one is age. As we get older and we don't get the next generation involved, it's going to die. And the other problem I think is home, HOAs with their rules and everything. If they get passed a law, that would let HOAs have to let a ham put up a reasonable antenna, I think it would help a lot. I know a lot of our club members live in an HOA, and they're really restricted.
Well, I think that's where POTA has become kind of a lifesaver, right, for people who live in HOAs.
Yes, and you get out there and, do it. Now, I got a friend he's been a ham for years, longer than I have, and he was a broadcast engineer, and he lives in an HOA down in Myrtle Beach, and what he does is he has his truck out front, or his car, puts the antenna on it, runs the wire into the house, and gets on the air.
Right, so if he wants to get on the air, he can operate with the antenna on the car.
That's right.
I read someplace that you lived in an HOA and you got permission for a flagpole, right?
Well, yes, and I stuck the antenna in the flagpole. Now, my neighbor was on the HOA board, and he knew there was an antenna there, but he didn't say anything because if he needed something done with his stereo or his TV, I was right there for him. So, and it worked out fairly well, but there's too many. You just have to be careful about it. And matter of fact, behind us was woods owned by the city. I ran a wire back into the woods. Nobody's going to see this. Well, the city came along and saw it and cut it down. I said we got out of there after 2 years and went to Cape Coral. And the only restriction was 40 feet was the highest you put a tower up without getting a permit.
But then you could get a permit and go higher if you wanted to.
Yes. I guess you probably have to go through the zoning board and everything, but,
The interesting thing I've learned about HOAs is that oftentimes they were started by the contractor that built the development, right? They kind of had a life of their own. That meant that even if you were in there for a while, you may not have any control over how to legislate in the HOA because it was still maybe a corporate office in some other city was managing it.
Yes, that's true. That's very true. And then after the builder finishes the project, then they turn it over to a committee of the homeowners association.
What excites you the most about what's happening in ham radio now?
I think Parks in the Air. I think that is a fantastic, operation for ham radio operators. It gets you out in the field. You get to meet people. People always say, "What are you doing?" And you get to explain what's going on with your radio there, and why you're there, and and people, it may get another person interested in doing it someday.
You can be spontaneous. You can do it anytime the spirit moves you. It's not an organized event.
That's true. Although our club does organize events, but you can just go out there anytime you want. There's a park 3 miles from here. It's, you just find a parking spot. I said the Yaesu radio. I have a Yaesu 8-TAS antenna, which is basically it's like a Tar Heel. It's a motorized antenna. I just pop it on top of the car with a mag mount, open the back trunk of the SUV, set the radio up, have a battery in there, and I just, it tunes the antenna, and you just go in the air.
And what will you operate? Will you operate JT8?
No, I prefer voice. I prefer phone, doing parks. I like the little exchanges you get with people, where they are, and, sometimes you have a second operator, which is nice to, hear.
Do you have advice that you'd give to newer returning hams, Bob? Yes.
Piece of advice is when you're on the radio, listen. Don't start tuning up on any frequency you feel like it. It just gets so annoying when there's somebody tuning up on a frequency that you're using for no reason at all. A second advice is try to stay away from HOAs if all possible. And And the other piece of advice, as I said, was to get a base station. Don't start off with a portable. I think portables are just, they're nice for, carrying it around to hear repeaters and everything. But to get back in, it's a real hassle, I think, with portables. And also, I think if the government would also allow technicians to operate FT8 or the digital portion of the HF bands, that would be great. That would get more people interested too, but that's another subject.
I think that's a great idea as well, especially since, for the most part, I think that a lot of this FT8 operation using like WSJT, it's pretty much automated, so it's kind of hard to make too big of a mistake.
That's true. Yeah.
But it puts you on the right channel.
Right. And the FT8 puts you on the right channel. If you FT8, FT4, it switches channels around. And you learn how to operate a computer with a ham radio.
Which is now a skill that's very necessary, since most of the new rigs have computer interfaces.
Yes, it makes it a lot easier. You sit there after a while, I have to change the band in the log,
Especially since it can do the logging for you.
Yes, yeah. All you do is put the call in, and the time and the everything's right there. If it's phone and CW, then you have to enter in the signal reports, but that's about it.
Bob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on QSO today. This was really fun.
My pleasure.
And it's nice to meet you. You had actually sent me a request to interview somebody else, and my reply to you was I should interview you first before I go with your suggestion. So I'm so happy that I did that. And if the video gets posted, then we'll get a chance to look at some of your ham shack as well.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Eric, thank you.
And I hope to work you on JT8 or something similar.
Okay, that sounds great. And thank you again.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Bob. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in W2ARP in the search box at the top of the page. You can sponsor the transcription of this episode or any of the previous episodes by clicking on the transcription button on every show notes page. The cost is $75 per episode, regardless of the length. We will quickly transcribe the episode and give you credit for your sponsorship. Please send us the call sign of the podcast to make sure that we transcribe what you want. Remember that QSO Today is value for value. Please support our project by making a donation or becoming a listener sponsor today. Use our Amazon link before shopping at Amazon, as we receive a small commission on your Amazon purchases. Subscribe to our mailing lists, both my blog and the podcast, and forward the messages to friends and family who would enjoy QSO Today content. Promote us on social media and give us a 5-star rating and reviews whenever you are asked. QSO Today is available on every podcast player and venue, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Podcasting 2.0. Get a Podcasting 2.0 player to make it easy to get your next episode as soon as we publish. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who, as the consummate artist, makes this host and his guests always sound brilliant. Ben also publishes a weekly Jewish history podcast. There is a link to that on the QSO Today homepage. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.